All right, mental health video for veterans and first responders, talking about ketamine and psychedelics, more so ketamine, real-time access in the US, right? So let's talk about this. Let's first tell veterans and first responders, if you're struggling with mental health, should you feel that way? Should you not feel that way? Even if you want to consider it, I think we all should consider our mental health. Your brain's not ineffectively addressing these situations. It's on the wrong path, okay? So let's step back and let's say you're not mentally ill. Let's more so just say your brain's doing the best it can to help you to survive. So our brains don't know right from wrong, good from bad. It's all in the way we train it. And you guys know all about training, right? So everybody believes in muscle memory. All the trainings that you all do, right? It becomes a reaction with the muscle memory aspects. Well, lo and behold, your muscles don't have memory. They're fibers. They contract and relax. There's no memory makers in your muscles. That's this guy up here, or gal. The brain helps with muscle memory. That's physical. The brain also helps with behavioral. So our brain duplicates what it knows from a behavioral aspect as well. So what does that mean? That should mean everything to you as a first responder and as a veteran, because you all were trained to handle acute situations. Okay. So what does acute situations mean? It's not a lecture that you're just sitting there analyzing, processing. It means that you're going to get thrown into the fire and you're going to expect to react, right? Which you all know this. So that reaction is not your conscious reaction, it's your subconscious. So conscious, subconscious. Conscious, weak, analytical, check boxes. Subconscious, stupid, simple, strong. So when we're thrown into the fire, we react. We do not react objectively and analytically, because our conscious is over here just hanging out in the background. It will do that later. We react with our subconscious, which is the stupid, simple, strong. And when we react, it's an emotional reaction from our subconscious. It saves us at that time. Our brain holds on to that. It holds on to it because it saved us. Our brain's here to make us to survive, right? So what happens over time is sometimes our subconscious starts to take over a little bit to where we just become these people, individuals, with the subconscious aspects to where we feel like we're more so emotionally led than objectively led. All right. So back in the day, y'all could walk in wherever, worst places in the world, and you felt calm and you felt like you got this. And yeah, you know what to do. But then over time, you feel like that objectivity, the physical aspects of that strength lowers, and you start feeling like you're becoming more emotional. So there's fear, or there's anger, or there is, aggression, or all these different pieces, right? Those are all emotional reactions. So over time, if we don't effectively process those emotions, they continue to lead us. Emotions are way stronger than the objectiveness that we have. If you think about emotions, we can't even describe them. You can tell yourself what makes you happy, angry, sad, joyful, fearful. But when you're trying to explain what that emotion truly feels like, we really don't have the capacity, the intelligence, maybe one day we will, to explain that. So when we can't explain it, we can't understand it. It gets stronger over time because the brain duplicates what it knows. So a couple pieces in our brain, basically I divide up our brain in 3 parts. There's a lot more parts than that, but we'll keep it simple. So your frontal lobe, right? Short-term memory. Short-term memory is attached to emotions, and your short-term memory loops. So what is that? That's trauma or significant events that you just can't get off your mind. And what happens is if we can't disconnect that emotion from the object, it's going to stay in our short-term memory. And here's the horrible piece of it. And I know you all know this. When that emotion comes up and that object comes up and you get something that's called triggered, it controls you, right? And it sucks because that's when we go out and kill ourselves sometimes. So what ketamine does, real time, okay? VA's covering this. VA has national guidelines, guys, to cover ketamine infusions. Ketamine does is it disassociates. What does that mean? It disconnects it. So you got your emotion, you got your physical, and they're in their short-term memory, and they're torturing you constantly. Ketamine disconnects these. Once it disconnects, we're able to use our weak conscious mind to analyze it from a distance, so we don't feel it. You analyze it from a distance. Once we analyze it, we have something middle part of our brain called your amygdala. The amygdala allows it to process. When it processes, it goes to your long-term memory. And here's the cool thing. Long-term memory, just memories, and then emotions, right? Frontal lobe, emotions, then the memory, torture. Long-term, just the memory, and you can bring back the emotion should you want to, but it doesn't lead the story. So if you're angry or aggressive, or you're fighting in your sleep, or you cry randomly, or you get so fearful, you stop and you get paralyzed and you do not want to leave, or you are drinking so much because you're trying to control your anxiety. So all you guys out there that are drinking, that's anxiety. You're decreasing your anxiety, and actually you're emotionally connecting with the object too, which is not good either. But you're doing what you can do to survive, because right now, mental health, we have the worst options possible to offer you, except ketamine infusions and personal opinion psychedelics once they get here. But we're seeing that ketamine is a true real-time intervention, medical intervention, right? To where it disconnects this stuff and you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was struggling with so much. No wonder I feel bad, right? You don't even have to do anything with ketamine infusions. It does it for you. You just have to sit with and analyze it and talk to cool people around you that are giving these infusions and say, well, this came up. Like I thought about when I was in Iraq, but then I thought about, you know what, I was playing baseball. It was like the same memory at the same time. Our brain just puts things together, right? It gets messy up in there. But once we're able to see analyze, right, from a third-party perspective, what's going on, then we're able to reestablish the control of ourselves and our brain, and we don't have to feel like our brain's controlling us. So what I'll tell people with ketamine, there's a lot of really like scary descriptors of what ketamine makes you feel like. I think I've been able to verbalize that specifically to where it's not scary and it can be understood more effectively. So what ketamine does is it acts as a meditative agent to put you in the present, right? So if you're dealing with significant events, traumas, whatever you want to call them, a lot of times we will, here's your ketamine state. Here's being in the moment, meditation, training your brain to live in the present. When you're truly in the present, you're completely neutral. You're like the ninja who's sitting there, whose eyes are closed, hands are on their knees, and you throw a baseball at them, they catch it. That person's truly in the moment. They're not thinking about the past. They're not preparing for the future. They're in the moment. But the training for veterans and first responders is, how do we make sure that when we're thrown into the fire, we know what to do? So it's all future, right? But then we learn from our mistakes and to prepare for a better plan for the future, but we forget about what we're supposed to be in the present. Excuse me. And that's where ketamine takes us, right? So triggers here, here we are in the present. We walk into somewhere and we feel this gut reaction, or we react, or we disassociate, or we go to this place to where we don't feel like ourselves, right? So what just happened? We took our past experiences and we placed it on our present, not consciously, but subconsciously, as protection, right? And then, or like I said earlier, we take our past and we prepare for the future, and we completely forget about our present. So the more that we can disconnect from these symptoms of trauma and anxiety and all these nasties, that are trying to control us, the more we can train our brain to live in the present. So I'll tell people a lot of times, think about anger, right? Anger is an emotion to where you don't go to bed angry. You don't text when you're angry. You don't email when you're angry. You don't respond when you're angry. So everybody knows that one. What about all the other emotions? They're the same way. So every time you react or you act on an emotion, it gets worse. It gets stronger. Those pathways get stronger. Every time you don't act on it, it gets weaker. So go back. If you played sports and you had to play, say basketball, right? You call play and you know every step of that play, right? Well, now, 10 years later, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years later, you may remember the name of a play, random one. You have no idea what it had to do with because you've not done it in so long. So it's the same way. It's the same way with anxiety, trauma, depression. These are all emotions that are associated with these symptoms, and we're acting on these symptoms because we don't know how to disconnect from them. And then we become part of it, right? So if you've been to therapists and they say, you're not a depressed person living with, or you're not a depressed person, you're a person living with depression. And you're like, that makes no sense to me at all. Ketamine actually disconnects that. And you can see, here you are, you're still there. And you're disconnected from the depression, right? So unfortunately with trauma, with this awesome training that you all get, that most people would have a nervous breakdown trying to do, you've been trained to react. That's what your brain knows, is how to react. And our brain doesn't know good from bad, right from wrong. It's the way we train it. So we're reacting and we don't understand why our brain's reacting. And then the emotions are getting caught up. Then you start getting emotionally led. And that's the last thing any veteran or first responder wants, right? We're supposed to walk into a scene, react, you walk out, you go have a beer, whatever, and life's good again, right? And next day you do the same thing. Well, what happens when you start having that overwhelming piece of, right? It's not you. Something that your brain didn't process. And then it gets stuck up here in the frontal lobe and it loops, and it's got the emotions and it loops and it traumatizes you over and over and over. Then you try to go to therapy to talk about it. And you're trying to pull up what you think's the worst part of it. It's torturing you and it doesn't get better. And it's because our brain held on to something else from that perspective. So with the ketamine infusions, when it gets disconnected and your brain, your consciousness is able to analyze your subconscious. So with ketamine, you're awake, you get disconnected from all this nastiness you're feeling. And here's your conscious, typically, here's ketamine, no ketamine consciousness, right? And here's your subconscious. So what ketamine does is it lowers your conscious, it increases your subconscious. So this is Oz, right? This is the guy behind the scenes. He's making really all the work. But our conscious is able to analyze the subconscious. So you're able to step back and you go, oh, you know what? When I was in that bomb that went off over there, I thought it was the dead kids that got me going. When in reality, your brain could have got stuck on a piece of paper that was going through the air because it's what grounded you during that horrible time. And your brain's already processed all that nastiness. Your brain just didn't process the paper that actually saved you during that time. That's what ketamine will show you. Ketamine will show you what grounded you during that time. That's why your brain's holding on to all this horrible stuff, because it can't see the whole picture. Once your brain can see the whole picture, it processes it, goes into your long-term memory. Long-term memory is, yeah, you guys are awesome. You've done all this stuff, and you don't feel that emotional connection to it. So one example that I give a lot of times, right, is like my brother got killed when I was 14. He was 17, just graduated high school, loved motocross, was doing a tabletop jump. His bike ended up hitting him in the head with some issues that happened, and head trauma, right? Died within 24 hours. He was brain dead. And it was nasty situation, right? Second week in high school. So I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to help other people who have had acute traumas, loss of children, loss of siblings, all these different pieces, because I saw my parents go through it all. But I've processed a lot of that stuff to where I can talk about it and I can bring the emotions with it should I want to, but I don't have to choose to. So I'll tell people, or not have to choose to, but like the emotional piece is like, it doesn't lead the story, right? Objectively, I lead the story and I can bring my emotions in. So if you're a veteran or you're a first responder and you feel like you're being led by emotions first, objectively analyze it. Are you angry? Are you fearful? Do you feel like you need a drink? Do you feel like you need a benzodiazepine? Do you feel like you need to go have sex with random people? Those are all emotions, guys. We're trying to connect. We're trying to appease something in our brain, right? So if you're doing that, you're a candidate to get ketamine infusions, and you don't have to be treatment resistant, because you guys, you're at a high risk, right? We got to stop looking at treatment resistant and say, who's at risk? And right now, the whole world's at risk. We've all experienced COVID. We're now experiencing a recession, right? And then all the changes of all the communities out there. So we're all at risk. So if you're able to identify these pieces that you're being emotionally led, you feel like your productivity starting to decrease a little bit. You feel safer at home than going out. You feel like you can't categorize your thoughts very well, and you can't prioritize them very well. That's when you want to get help, right? Because if you can disconnect this stuff and train your brain to be in the present, which we all can do, that's how you get better. You can recognize the training that you've had allows you to be these fierce warriors in the communities and in places I would never want to go. But that doesn't have to be your all, end all, know all, or whatever they call it. Sorry. But to have all of that, like, you don't have to have that while you're at home to where it starts getting mixed in, right? That's when the categories start getting separated. So one thing I've noticed is, like, Newton's laws of physics, right? To every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. So when we get hit with something and our subconscious comes up and reacts, it's conflict. Our subconscious just saved us somehow. And if we don't effectively process this stuff, then we stay in these conflicts, and the conflicts is the polarities, right? So that's where anxiety and depression live in the same space. But also from a psychological level, that's where control and out of control live. So if you think about control, which you all are trained to be in control of an acute, unstable situation, versus out of control, and you're trying to match those, right? Your brain will match those polarities. So if you feel completely out of control, what's the ultimate control? The most ineffective coping mechanism in the world when you feel out of control is your brain telling you itself, I will make you feel in control by killing yourself. So the first piece you need to recognize is when you have suicidal thoughts, that's your brain trying to reestablish control. And it's abnormal. It's because you feel out of control. It's abnormal because, have you talked to anybody who's killed themselves? Did they reestablish control? I mean, I know there's a lot of times you guys are living in hellacious conditions and you just want to get out. And I understand that. And then the medications that we give you don't work, or they work for a week or two, or they make you more suicidal, right? It's ridiculous what we offer right now. But you're trying to survive because you want to survive, but you can't live in the hellacious conditions that you're continuing to live in. So if you feel that way and you're having suicidal thoughts, your brain's trying to establish control of the situation. But when you kill yourself, you actually lose all control, right? And another big statistic, when you kill yourself, your immediate family members have a 40% chance of killing themselves too. So when you have that self-negative cycling, my kids be better off, wife be better off, I'm traumatizing them, all this stuff, the worst thing you can do is kill yourself for your kids and for your family members, because you're putting them at risk. So there's hope out there. Ketamine, psychedelics, all the veterans that are out there that are pushing for this, I commend you. Let's change the system and let's do it together. And let's show the world's not mentally ill, guys. Right now it is, kind of, but it's because we're not giving the effective interventions that we need to give for the brain to actually start healing itself. Ketamine and psychedelics have shown us that if the brain can get into the meditative state, it will start regenerating on its own. We don't need to tell it what to do. It's the best, biggest computer in the entire world. It knows what to do. We just need to set it up in the right conditions and stop suppressing it. Stop putting a Band-Aid on an elephant, right? Actually utilize ketamine for what it's worth. Allow yourself the ability to reestablish the power and the strength that you have, because you have it within you. And if you don't address what caused the conflict, it will continue to get worse. And like I said, you know what caused the conflict, but it could have been a piece of paper flying through the air that allowed your brain not to effectively process it. So don't ever think that your ketamine is going to get you stuck in trauma. That's a fear that a lot of people have. More so, it's going to allow this stuff to come up. You're not going to feel emotionally connected to it. It's going to allow you to feel like you're getting things off your plate, that all that pressure is starting to decrease that you feel, and you're going to start feeling like yourself again, like you can breathe, like you can stop and smell the flowers. You can recognize that the sky is blue and it has clouds in it. Because what happens is if you're in survival mode all the time, you don't stop and smell the flowers. You're just trying to survive. So we've got to disconnect that and tell your brain, listen, you don't have to run from a bear at all times. And you know this, but your subconscious doesn't. It's hypervigilant. It's duplicated what it knows. And it's just making you here and here and here and here. And you just can't process things anymore. So if you're a veteran or first responder and you feel these symptoms, here's your brain. Everyone usually feels all of these. So don't look at it as the primary diagnosis. When you get diagnosed with something in mental health, believe it or not, it's about 78% inaccurate. That's how good we are in mental health. We'll diagnose you wrong 78% of the time. You know, placebo is usually about 20%. So we're actually making the statistic of placebo look better than all these skills and years of training that we've had to tell you what's wrong with your brain. We're worse than nature. But anyway, so you got these 5 symptoms that coexist in your brain. You're going to have symptoms of depression, anxiety, trauma, suicidality. When you stop not sleeping, you're at higher risk. Because at nighttime is when we process stuff, if we can, right? So sometimes it gets so overloaded here, we can't process through our amygdala, the amygdala that allows that long-term piece of objectivity, right? That's the piece that we're looking for. So you'll have, when you're not sleeping, you'll have all these symptoms sitting there and they're just getting worse over time. So I always tell people, go back 10 years when you started having anxiety. You worse now? And I've never gotten an answer that says, no, I'm way better, unless they've had ketamine or psychedelics, right? Because the brain duplicates what it knows. So your coping mechanisms get better, but so your symptoms, as your symptoms get worse, right? Because we're not breaking the cycle. So break the pattern, break the cycle, put your brain into a meditative space and disconnect from it. And if you can't do that, go get ketamine and go get psychedelics. It will put you in that meditative space. And then you can learn these skill sets, right? You can learn all these tools that you have because you all have them. It's just society doesn't know how to deal with you all. They've got to look at your background of training. Have to. You've been trained to be a machine and a warrior. Society right now doesn't know what to do with that. We'll give you a medication. Keep taking it every day. Let's hope it gets better in 6 weeks. It has nothing to do with what you all are going through. It just suppresses your symptoms temporarily, but it doesn't address what's causing the situation. Ketamine addresses what causes the situation. So here's my other scale, veterans. You're not sick, your brain's on the wrong path. We can recognize it. You've got a trail, right? Trailhead, path 1, path 2. Your brain's helping you to survive. You go down this one path, it's the wrong path. Ketamine psychedelics allows you to come back to the trailhead and reset yourself. You can start walking down this path. Are you still going to have bumps in the ropes? Absolutely, you're going to have bumps in the road, but you're going to be able to tangibly assess them better and see what's causing your brain to cycle and recycle. So once you see that, you get back to being you. You feel more laid back and more empowered. That's what I hear with ketamine. But it's not easy. You've got to increase your emotional intelligence. You can't increase your emotional intelligence while you're running from a bear. You're just in survival. You're just running. So once we take the bear away and you step back and you go, oh my gosh, I can smell the flowers. We've got to reteach your brain how to smell the flowers. And we can do it. Our brains are very smart. We just have to think we don't know more than our brain. We have to learn to work with it, not against it. So here is your chart. This is the Kathryn Walker's neurologic chart. on, take a screenshot of that. Katie Walker's neurologic chart on brain health or illness or death or whatever else we want to call it. So Newton's laws of physics. To every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. So everybody likes the diagnosis of bipolar, manic depressant, whatever they used to call it, right? So it's just opposite ends of the spectrum. So let's put science into mental health for the first time that let's put science into a theory, right? So when you hit conflict, what's conflict? Conflict is a situation that you just didn't expect that day. I also see conflict as being when your bases change, right? So COVID caused a lot of conflict to our athletes, caused a lot of conflict to our kids who were in school, who had to change. A lot of times conflict can be like if you were in the war zone, you came back to the US or wherever, then you had to transition there too, right? So there's conflict with your base. So look at it as like pillars, and then, you know, maybe your pillars get kind of shifted a little bit. So once you make that change, you get about 6 months in your brain to effectively transition into that change. And if you don't effectively transition back to that area, then you'll start having symptoms of anxiety and depression. And you don't have just symptoms of anxiety, you don't have just symptoms of depression. They typically live in the same space. And most providers don't look at both, but they're both there. So I see conflict, and I see it a lot, you know, even your kids, if you look at your kids, it's like when they go from like middle school to high school, or, you know, elementary school to middle school to high school to college, college to professional, professional to divorce, having a kid, getting a long-term illness, you know, something like that, like something that changes your base, right? That's conflict. So when you hit the conflict, your brain goes to polarities. That's where anxiety and depression live. If you do not address what's causing these symptoms with this conflict as to why your brain got off track, your brain's going to continue to duplicate what it knows. So that's when you get something called bipolar 2. If you know what bipolar 2 is, it's kind of more so just a reactive anxiety and depression. You have higher peaks and lower lows, and they're more reactive, right? And then bipolar 1 is when you get something else called mania in it. That's when you're not sleeping. And you just really have more abstract thoughts that aren't normal. And then between here, you get something called like schizoaffective, right? To where you start having thoughts that are abstract, that you feel you can't really differentiate. Are they real? Are they not real? Is it a delusion? Is it a hallucination kind of stuff? You think it might not be, but you're having a little bit of these things, you know? And then, so your schizoaffective's here, and then you go to something called schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is where you're having thoughts that aren't there, right? You're having visual, auditory, just different types of pieces that are coming to the surface, and you can't differentiate. Is it reality or is it not reality, right? That's schizophrenia. And then you get your last one, which is paranoid schizophrenia, which is, it's horrible, right? It's just torture. So my neurologic theory is, you know, we can look at the brain in different stages of wellness or illness, mild, moderate, severe, to where anxiety and depression kind of coexist. And then if you don't, really look at these different pieces, then it progresses to this. But one of the neat things with ketamine is ketamine's able to break each of these different patterns, to where if we can effectively have interventions with coaching, therapy, different pieces, then we can start tapering these stages back to where we can go all the way back to what caused your conflict. And as long as we're retraining the brain as to what to do, then we're able to effectively address it. So 3 topics that people don't really talk about. I personally don't believe that it's all your neurotransmitters, your dopamine, serotonin, all these things. I don't think they're the primary route of what causes our brain to ineffectively act. I think it's more so the functionality, processing, interpretation, deployment of our thoughts, and the strengths of the structures. I do think that serotonin and epinephrine and dopamine, all those guys, they do help, right? Your norepinephrine as well, they help. But it's kind of the same way, I think, as saying, oh, well, Katie's testosterone level's high. And she's not like built like a, why, like she's not physically built like this bodybuilder. It's because I don't have the discipline right now to go to the gym, right? So it's the same way. It's like, just because our serotonin and our dopamine levels are off, it doesn't show that we're going to think correctly if we've not been trained to think correctly. It just makes no sense. So let's rock the world with some new terms. So salience network, central executive network, default mode network. Salience network. If you ruminate, if you cannot drop thoughts, you're struggling with your mental health. This structure is at a deficit for some weakness to where it needs to be strengthened. Ketamine and psychedelics help to strengthen this network. Your central executive network. How does data come in? How is it processed? And is it processed in an abnormal way or a normal way? If you tell 10 people the same sentence, they all 10 may interpret it differently. But is it in a healthy manner? Is it in a negative manner? Is it in an incorrect manner? All right. So it's more thought processes and learning, the training aspects of how our brain effectively thinks. And then default mode network is you have a positive or a negative one, more so to where it should be a positive action creates a positive reward, a negative action creates a negative reward. Sometimes those get flipped, and that can lead to addiction and such. Or if you're around people and you're just like, they are so negative, that could be a negative default mode network. It could also be something called catastrophic thinking, which is a trauma response. So our brain will train us to live in the worst of the worst. Veterans and first responders live in the worst of the worst. And in that way, when it doesn't happen, we feel like we've achieved something. But unfortunately, we've made ourselves live in these salacious conditions to where you don't have to live there. You're already trained. I'm trained to save lives. I don't have to sit there and think about what drugs I'm going to push or how I'm going to do compressions on somebody, or how I'm going to intubate them, put it on a breathing machine. I don't have to think about that all the time. I'm trained. That's my muscle memory. You're trained too. If you can't drop it, it's not you, it's your brain. And it's a structure that can be increased in strength. So hang in there if you're struggling as a veteran or a first responder, and look at ketamine infusions. It's real time right now. I'm working with a company called Enthea, helping to get employers to start covering this for their employees. So advocate for yourselves, advocate for your kids, advocate for your communities, call your insurance companies and tell them they need to cover ketamine infusions. We're looking at treatment resistance, guys, but look at the data for suicide. It's straight up. Almost 30% of female high school students last year had a suicide plan. 30%. What are we doing? What we're doing, it's ineffective. Everything that we're doing is ineffective. Call 988, call 911, go to the ER. We're doing that right before they're killing themselves, guys. Let's figure out how to look at risk, how to be preventative, not for suicide, but how to be preventative once they start having symptoms of anxiety and depression. If we're looking at just suicide, it's like ripping off the tires on a car and saying, here's one tire, I hope you can make it far. They're already halfway there to death, guys, before we're intervening, doing anything. And we think we're doing a great job at preventing suicide. When you see that your family members or yourselves or your kids or your parents are having symptoms of anxiety, they don't want to get out of the house, they feel like they can't get out of bed, they feel like there's just so much pressure, they can't turn their brain off, get them help. Reach out to a ketamine clinic, find ketamine. And I understand there's people out there that are going to antagonize. They're going to say, this one doesn't do it right. This one doesn't do it right. It's not us. It's a medical intervention. So find the medical intervention. Advocate for yourselves. Advocate for others. And then as veterans, keep supporting the psychedelic piece. Push forward. Now's the time for change. And every time we don't commit ourselves to this, we lose someone. And it doesn't hurt us until it's someone we know, right? And I'm expecting all of you all have known someone who have died from addiction or pain or mental health or whatever else, right? So keep pushing forward. You've got this. Ketamine's got this. And if you got any questions, let me know, right? If I don't know them, I'll try to find somebody who does. And then let's just change. Let's change the way the world looks at the brain. Let's put some neurologic theories out there. Let's have people argue with me and tell me I'm an idiot. That's fine. But let's get something out there that's different than what we know now, because what we know now is not working. So keep pushing. Let's change the world, guys, one person at a time. And advocate for yourselves, advocate for others. Take the chance.